Hi everyone, welcome to the third episode of T-Minus podcast. Today we have Serge. Serge is an investor at MSA Capital, very deep into Web3 and games, but we can maybe just let him speak about how is his experience so far. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks man, thanks, I appreciate it. Great to be on. So just a bit of background on me. So investment banker by training. Obviously did that, hated it, moved on. And I most recently actually just moved back from China, where I was a Schwarzman scholar at Tsinghua University. Fantastic program. I spent like a year in Beijing, whereas spent most of my time just focusing on venture capital at MSA Capital. Fantastic funds, focusing everything from like seed, Series A, with like really ramping on their Web3 efforts and gaming efforts. So, focused largely on that. And still involved with them, and still, and I'm pursuing something else as well on the side, just like trying to build some things with some pretty cool guys on the African continent. So, really excited to chat gaming with you, Marco.
Fantastic. Since I believe you are in charge of kind of the Web3 and gaming thesis at your fund, what is your thesis about Web3 games?
Yeah. Well, I'm not in charge, but I'm very much like when I was there, is very much that's just pretty much what I focused on. But basically, my thesis now, I guess, is gaming sector, largely speaking, has broadly been a resilient one in terms of economic downturns, which are very much in. I think that blockchain gaming right now definitely to some degree demonstrates that. We're seeing that like most of the downturn in UAWs is being very much in like the DeFi segment. NFTs are completely crashing. OpenSea very much losing market share, whilst you find the daily average unique active wallets for GameFi is still pretty much trending at around 1 million. So I think that thesis there very much remains true, and so I'm very much excited by it. I think when we look at gaming more broadly outside of Web3, which I think is extremely important to do. And I think maybe not enough people really consider how blockchain gaming fits within the wider traditional gaming market. I think that definitely public equities are kind of getting a little bit slammed. Obviously Roblox they missed expectations, and very much bouncing back from really propelled COVID performance. But right now I think there's a lot of people very much still building cool stuff. I think we're very much seeing a lot of great. I think there's a lot of very cool infrastructure as well being built in gaming too. And there's a lot of different segments that I think blockchain can be useful in gaming. I don't think blockchain will completely change gaming, but I think we'll just augment the experiences, right? I'm optimistic going forward, definitely.
Absolutely. A lot of things actually to unpack in there. First, you mentioned a lot of infrastructure needs to be built. As we had in a previous conversation, is very hard to play Web3 games. The UI is horrible, experience is horrible. What's missing? What do we need to kind of scale these kind of games?
I think what we need to think about is firstly, even before we think about infrastructure, we need to think about why the blockchain and gaming combination makes sense, right? And right. So people will think about properties like interoperability, composability, etc., right? Alongside, just capturing value in periphery markets. And the reason and why I think that's useful is that I think that allows us to then think about what we would then need for basically to make that usable, built for crypto nerds, right? Just to put it bluntly. And, easy things making it super easy to play the game without any barriers to entry. And B, having a single user identity throughout the game, having, and some idea of shared payment mechanisms to make our lives easier as gamers who are playing different, on different platforms. I think that's very much going to be key factors going forward. I think another thing that we're seeing is very much we're seeing a lot of toolkits being built for Web3 developers, right? For Web2 game developers, essentially trying to remove the pain points of traditional gamers using blockchain and Web3. So names like Nefta, they just raised, right? They again just simple toolkit. Handling everything from development, publishing, scaling, tokenomics, etc. Things that I think gaming sector traditionally doesn't really like to look at. Big Time Studio just announced their open loop platform recently as well, which I think again is it's very much this idea of there are cool game developers in Web3 who are they create very valuable infrastructure for the gaming sector as a whole. And, you know, rather than like just focus on the games, they say, oh, you know what, like we've created something cool here. Let's like let other people in the ecosystem use it and try it, right? Like that's how we got things like Unity, Unreal, Doom, etc. Right? So I definitely think that like the infrastructure is very much, you know, needs fixing from both like the user perspective and the developer perspective. But what I think is actually more interesting is, or more pressing is like, I think right now we've seen a lot of like last like year, blockchain gaming have raised so much money, right? Like, so in the next like 2 years or something, like I think really they need to show what they've done with that, right? There needs to be like a couple of standout games and standout titles that like illustrate the value of blockchain, adding blockchain to games. And I think if that doesn't happen, I think that there could be some like just more reticence from the broader gaming industry to kind of accept it. And honestly, I think it's kind of on the Web3 community to really like do more showing and not telling.
Yeah, that's true. No, for sure. What I'm thinking is like, will it be a traditional gaming company that incorporate Web3 in a like proper way to create better experience? Or do you think it's more Web3 game studios that create like a killer game, you know, like the next League of Legends or something like that?
Yeah, I think there's a few ways to think about it. So like, I think from my perspective, like the first thing is just IP, right? So I think there's a massive opportunity to put valuable IP on the blockchain. And when I say that, I mean that like, I think the games that are most likely to be successful are the ones that already have fans and, you know, like audiences who are attached to characters, right? And so there are quite a few companies who do this, like Caffeine Gaming, for etc. These guys growing massively quickly, developing partnerships with like, you know, very like talented gaming studios. While they create the games, they help like add them onto the blockchain and make it make sense. I think when it comes to who makes the better games, I definitely think that the first wave of blockchain gaming, like I mentioned, Axie Infinity, Alien Multiplayer Kingdoms, has illustrated that like game developers make better games and crypto people should not be making games, right? Like I think that like that's very much illustrated that that's like something we need to accept, and this is the reality. It's actually pretty hard to make a fun game, even if the game looks simple. You know, they're not like making games isn't easy.
No, that's why like all the kind of gaming company, like Web3 gaming company that are under development, they're creating new games. They have maybe a very blockchain related, you know, experience, but they're trying to hire maybe the best talent from the gaming sector, but they don't know themselves like much of, you know, how do you do a great game? Like how do you build it? How do you manage the economy, the expectation, and everything around it? So what like I remember in your presentation, you explained very well the difference between like Web2 and Web3 games, in the sense that when you play a Web2 games, maybe you buy a skin on Fortnite. The skin is not really yours. You're just buying the license for like the right to use it in Fortnite. While instead in Web3, if you buy the skin, it's yours. Like you can bring it to another ecosystem potentially, or just do whatever you want with it. Do you think it will be like does this really matter? Is like a selling point for Web3 games, or?
I think it's like 2021 was definitely a year where like we just overhyped the idea of ownership in games, right? Like I think to some degree, obviously, like it is, people do prefer to have like their in-game assets actually being owned. I think that is definitely like a preferable outcome, but it's not going to like massively move the needle, right? Like I don't think just because you own it like legally, that's going to like really change too much. It's about what that ownership permits you to do, right? And so that means that the addition of like a legal ownership only is valuable if you can use it across, you know, different platforms, B, sell it and trade it in different markets, and have like more uses of it outside of the game, right? Because theoretically, right, like you said, if like what you own in Fortnite is just within like the remit of Fortnite, if even in the blockchain version, you could only still use it in Fortnite, it doesn't matter whether it's an NFT or not, right? Because like Fortnite have no incentive right now, I guess, to like screw you over and get rid of people's in-game microtransactions, right? That's not going to happen. So as a result, like it needs to be like, we need to think about it in a case of from a mindset of what can blockchain add to gaming that we can't do right now. And I think that the answer to that lies in a way of just trustless transactions, right? So when I say that, I mean like the idea of rather than, like, because theoretically you don't need blockchain, right? You could just have a bunch of APIs. Developers can have a bunch of APIs allowing people to, trade and use all these different assets across different games, right? But that's just like not the reality because of, competitive dynamics, general fight for IP and, trust, etc. By having things on blockchain, that like mitigates those issues to, I think, a point which I think is useful. I think that's kind of the most promising case. And then obviously the features which on top of that, like, like I mentioned, composability, interoperability, provide a lot of value in what we could use as gamers, right? Like, so I think that's kind of how at least I view that part.
Yeah. So the idea is to have a sort of permissionless ecosystem, like very, very huge, where many IPs kind of cooperate between each other and there are no boundaries between it. In that case, then, so the NFT makes sense because you can bring your skin from here to there and use it there, and just in that sense, create more value than have it only on one ecosystem.
Yeah. Like that theoretically would provide a lot of value. But again, at the same time, like, gaming is an industry of just massive consolidation, right? Where IP is king. And so there has to be a very compelling case for the biggest IP, the biggest companies, like, give up their most valuable price IP, not give it up per se, but like at least open its doors and, break down its walls. I think there are definitely like a lot of ways we can think about how that will work. Like I mentioned, we'd have like, corkage fees, decentralized game engine, etc. Like I definitely think there's like people have thought about the infrastructure and the world this would work. Like I know Navik, who posts like fantastic research pieces on this. Definitely worth looking at if anyone hasn't checked that. But yeah, exactly. That's exactly how I approach that.
Yeah, I've been following Navik podcast. It's a very, very nice podcast, especially if you want to learn and understand gaming from gaming experts. Like they have several episodes that has nothing to do with Web3, and they just talk with leaders in that sector, and you can see like how they think, how complex it is actually to manage a game without even introducing open economy.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you think there is a specific kind of genre for games that is more compelling for Web3, or it doesn't really matter?
I think that, well, I think we have to try to at least narrow into game genres that are like, more, that are on the upturn, right? That are like more popular. So like things like, battle royale, open world, RPG games, as opposed to games like, like party games, music games, stuff like that, which people don't really use and play anymore. Then definitely we have to take like the popular genres that exist in the traditional gaming industry. And then when it comes to where Web3 gaming would make sense, I think it's just where like the in-game economy in the game is, highly significant and very much like adds value to the game experience, right? If you play like an instant game or something like that, blockchain is not going to be useful in that because it's going to be some like, silly Facebook game where nothing really matters and that you don't need to own anything and doesn't add to your experience by having like ownership in any kind of way. So I think that definitely is going to be games which have thriving in-game economies where there's a potential for whatever's in that economy to be used in other economies and B, like to extract value from like periphery markets.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the end, the idea is always to have a proper game first and trying to, you think like you can use NFTs or any sort of in-game like open economies to create more value for the users? Is there something like that can be sort of use of NFT in games? Yeah,
definitely. I think the best approach to blockchain gaming so far, in terms of what you just mentioned, is Splinterlands, right? So Splinterlands have the best philosophy when it comes to blockchain gaming, in my opinion, underscored by A, like sustainable tokenomics, and B, the idea of gameplay and fun coming first, right? And this is something that we've like in the last like ever since Axie tanked and in the last like 6 months or so, I think the industry has definitely shifted toward like the idea of things being fun first, right? For example, in Splinterlands, you don't even need crypto NFTs to play, right? Like, and they've even in this entire like bear market, so to speak, people. The number of daily active users is still remain fairly strong, right? Obviously, they had their like reworking of their rewards, which just killed a lot of bots. But like in terms of actual genuine players, people are still very much playing the game, and because the incentives of making money is not whole premise of playing the game, right? So I think their NFTs make sense because what's happened is that there's a game which doesn't expose itself to a natural boom and bust cycle, dictated by like the overall health of crypto markets. And instead, the NFTs just allow the financialization of your assets in the game to be secondary to the experience, which I think then is a very strong value add, because then it makes it a game, like not like a job or like, a money-making scheme or like a day trading thing, right?
That's true. Yeah, that's for sure. It's like, at the end, you have to play a game because you want to have fun. It's an entertainment. So it's kind of competing with watching a movie on Netflix or, go for a walk somewhere.
Exactly.
So if instead of replace your job, maybe, do you think like in some sort of extent, like if you are a very good player, or can it be like a sort of minor percentage of gamers that play for money in a sort of open ecosystem?
Sorry, you mean like if will there be a select portion of players who continue just to play for money?
Yeah, like if you have let's say 80-90% of players, they actually just have fun and happy to spend money. Do you think it will be any kind of sustainable environment having a, let's say, 10-20% of people playing just for money?
I think like that wouldn't even, obviously 10 to 20% is still relatively high when thinking about games as in general, but that isn't like new, right? Like there are people who play like earning in gaming has always been a theme, right? Whether it's like esports or like, this idea of like, like Virgin Gaming and stuff like that, people have always been able to like kind of earn money within games. So I think that there's always going to be a portion of people who do it slightly for money, depending on the type of game. I think that largely speaking though, if the core audience who play the game, who carry, token valuations and whose behavior dictates the overall dynamics of the market and the in-game economy, if they are playing for fun, I do then think that is much likely to lead to sustainable tokenomics going forward, because then it just essentially means that there isn't a game of scholars trying to like wait until they've reached that peak valuation and then just dumping everything, right? And then that wouldn't have like as much of an effect on the markets, right? Obviously, that exact number of what proportion makes sense, I don't know, and I'm sure it's pretty low. But I think that as long as the core as long as the core user base are in for the games, then for sure.
Makes sense. Yeah. Let's see. We don't have. Well, there are a few games, as you say, that are coming out. Big Time is one we're looking at. That maybe the center, like the core audience, is still very much Web3. So it's still hard to evaluate, but I kind of put the game first. And since they structure it, for example, as a free to play, everyone can come and join the game and see. And first, let's say, try it out and see how it works before spending any money or just trying to make money in the game.
Yeah. That's always been something I thought was ridiculous, having to like spend money on like a game that's like marketed as free, and then like, you end up paying like thousands of dollars just to start something crazy like that. Like I always thought that was really stupid.
100%. Like a free to play game grew like stupidly fast in the last few years because there are no barriers. Like you can download it, and in the same way, it's kind of hard to target your spenders because it's a very, very small percentage of people that actually bring the large amount of revenue in free-to-play games. Do you think we can have this sort of mechanics also in Web3 games where you actually own what you earn in the game?
I think that if you don't have free-to-play games, I think it is more bad than good, right? Just in terms of overall your scale and exposure. Like I think, like you mentioned, right, the very beginning, at the very beginning of this combo was the issue of like actually just trying to get onto it, trying to buy everything is a fucking nightmare, right? And so that's why everyone who plays is not playing it for fun. I think that it's free to play is like obviously going to be, at least in my opinion, the primary model of how we play games. I think that's definitely been the case for like the last 5 years, and I see no reason for that not to continue.
Sure. So in like still having free to play games in crypto is still like something viable, you think?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think there's been like at least from the way I view it, I don't think there's been like a massive threat to. I don't think that the weaknesses of blockchain gaming is a result of it being free to play.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I don't think that's like ever been the case. And so like, I wouldn't attribute the, like that cause and effect. I think, yeah, I'm very much still optimistic.
Yeah, that's true. Especially like when you have to, even to spend any amount of money on a game before actually trying out, it's kind of hard. It's always hard. For example, I remember a few months ago, there was FIFA for free with the PlayStation Plus. Like, I didn't buy it before. And I mean, I've been playing FIFA for forever. I just didn't want to buy the new one because, like, it's always the same one and I'm going to spend more money. I'm just not going to buy it. And then I load the free play, play a few weeks, and then I just spend money. So it definitely works as a model. Mm-hmm. Because at least, like, if you are interested in the game, you can always say, well, I didn't actually pay anything for it. Let me get some extra content. Let me, I don't know, buy a skin or just get stronger in the game. So it kind of works out. What's in terms of kind of in terms of kind of when you see a new game comes out and maybe you have to understand if you would invest in it or not. What are the main things you're looking at?
Investing in, like, I think when it comes to investing in gaming, there's investing in like game studios, and then there's investing in game infrastructure. So like actual games versus infra. I think when it comes to, as with anything, right? Like as with any startup, you need to be looking at like team, problem, solution, market size, etc. Right? All these like relatively basic things, and then thinking about like their obvious, like their secret sauce, their competitive advantage, what's their like moat, right? I think when it comes to games, assuming the game hasn't like been launched yet or anything, then you don't have data on like retention and average spend per user and like these like features these metrics which tell you how engaging a game is. So as a result, you have to look at have they built games before that have been fun? Have they like what are the stats on those? And B, you'd have to consider like what the actual tokenomics of the game, right? So like, does this make sense? Is it like a pyramid scheme? Are people losing money if they just come in late or something, right? Do we have like the syncing mechanisms, etc.? And then as an investor, you also have to think about like, am I buying tokens or am I buying equity? So like the way I think about it is it's likely better to get a combination of both. So because buying tokens exposes you to something that's a really liquid asset class, right? Like typically, after it's vested, you can just sell them, right? So there isn't an issue of like necessary timing as long as the vesting period isn't too long. But at the same time, typically tokens kind of get crashed, right? Like after a game is launched. So there's always a fear of like, we could just like, by the time it's vested, like the game's in a downturn or whatever, or they're in between like launching one game and the next game or something like that. And then the token price is just low. So I don't want to sell them and then I have an issue, right? And then the other hand, you want to invest in equity just because that's something maybe we understand a bit more. Valuation just kind of makes a bit more sense for equity rather than tokens, because we can obviously use the broader gaming industry as like, like a comparable universe. So I think that's very much like the gaming side. And then for the infra, right, it's more about like, again, obviously problem solution, etc. But this is something which I think is just a bit of a safer bet, because at least for me, the liquidity event is a lot clearer. You'd invest in something where builders, even like that, like recession or boom, people are still building, right? And so like, if you think about like Web3 broadly, like thinking about like Alchemy and Fury, etc., like these are still fantastic plays because people are building regardless of like whether it's a boom or bust. And so the monetization is still remaining strong, right? And there isn't, and obviously like using SaaS models is just like probably the best business model anyways. So like it's something that in the future we can always have a reasonable conviction of like a strong revenue stream. So I think infra is typically like an easier bet. Gaming studio, like individual games can be a bit of a crapshoot, but like I think that if they have like really solid IP, that definitely does help. For example, like Sorare, obviously like they're streaming well. There's like the cricket version as well. There's another one at Alaska, which has a very strong IP in terms of rugby and boxing. So I'm excited about them too. And founder's actually fantastic, very smart guy. So yeah, I think that's like kind of how I think about it. But again, I think as long as like a founder and a team is able to tell a really cool story, I think that also just like really helps, right? They can like tell the story, create a narrative, right? Like that, like really something that like feeds into the idea of community, right? Like I said, for example, the Splinterlands community is like so vibrant and so strong, right? Like they can literally like launch any collection or whatever, and people will always buy it. It will sell out like regardless, right? So like I think as long as like you have the belief that these attributes can kind of manifest themselves, I think that that's the indication that you've got something good in your hands.
Yeah, IP is definitely like a very strong moat for any game studio or company. Just last week, we were speaking with Mark. Maybe you saw it, is YNWA. He was the first player in Sorare.
Yeah, I saw that, yeah.
Yeah, and we had a very kind of deep conversation about what Sorare was on kind of day one and kind of evolve along these years. And it seems like you already gave the user something that they know already. They know fantasy football, they know their favorite teams, etc. And they just give them a platform for them to just play and own their fantasy player. So Sorare is definitely one of the best gaming, if we can call it gaming, company in Web3. That's for sure.
Exactly, because I think like the way that like it's much easier to explain Sorare as like a standout in the blockchain gaming space, just because it enabled an experience that wasn't possible before, or not, maybe not possible, at least like didn't happen before without blockchain, right? I think when you talk to like traditional game developers, like they all hate blockchain gaming, right? Like they all think it's like a Ponzi scheme and everything. And to some extent, I don't blame them. And obviously, Minecraft banned everything, NFTs, Steam, Valve banned it ages ago. It's only like there's very much like a reticence to like engage in it, because there haven't been that many examples of like projects within the gaming sector that have clearly demonstrated that what they did could be done without blockchain, and it was like really value additive, could to some extent compete with like the Web2 games that currently exist, right? Like it's those kind of properties that I think like build like a standout player and a standout investment. Yeah,
definitely. It introduced, I believe, a lot of complexity in how to, first of all, from a technological kind of standpoint, how to integrate blockchain with your game and then manage everything around it. So I can see like the skepticism from traditional company to kind of stay far from blockchain until everything is kind of settled and they realize they can do something more with it. As you say, like Sorare, you couldn't really do it without blockchain. At least you wouldn't have the sort of licensing player from the sports team.
Yeah, I don't think you can just be like, oh, hey, own Messi and then like La Liga and like the French League are going to be cool with that. Like,
that's true. No, absolutely. Things I wanna go back to. You were talking about tokenomics when you were looking at a project. So, is there how do you differentiate like good tokenomics against bad tokenomics in games?
Man, honestly, like tokenomics is one of those things that like I'm not even sure that like there's like no best practice at all, right? Like it's so like unclear, at least from my perspective, as to what makes the most sense. But there are a few factors that we can think about, right? This is maybe tokenomics more broadly, right? So there has to be like some like real utility of the token, right? Like the token has to enable you to do something that holding that digital asset like empowers you with some like functionality. An example of one that doesn't do this, and this is a little bit of a stray from gaming, but is Ripple, right? So like Ripple's XRP token is like virtually useless for like enacting payments, right? And so like no one holds it, but people use Ripple. So like having a Ripple token is like a bad investment, but like Ripple in equity can make some kind of sense, right? I think the next thing is supply and price like stability mechanism. So this is one that like I think, so like I mentioned, Splinter Labs like did like fairly well, right? So they have their like dark energy crystals token is something that they're able to like balance out like that amount, that balance throughout the game, like based on like the number of people who are winning per day, right? So cards are burned for like DEC, SPS, which is like their other token, and other vouchers get burned when validated licenses are purchased, etc. Right? So like they have like, at least from their economy, they've thought well about how you burn assets to avoid like them falling in price as more people go in and play the game, right? So that's like obviously I think a key factor. I think are the factors that, make sense. You got to think about distribution, right? Like, is it going to be like, are we going to airdrop it, public sale, private sale, etc.? If it's a private sale, like investors are going to want a discount, right? Like how much is it that's going to be 3 times, 4 times, whatever. And then another thing would be like, which to my head is governance, right? So like, to what degree is it decentralized? Is it like progressive centralization, like people like DYDX are doing? Or is it just like decentralized from the get-go? Who makes decisions? Is it on-chain, off-chain, etc.? These are like all a lot of questions, which I guess like we all think about when analyzing tokenomics, but like I don't have like the right answer for like what makes the most sense, right? But I think that in a few years, like I guess like as the industry matures and we kind of, like people will iterate, builders will try again, and we'll see what works and what doesn't. And I think we'll kind of get more clarity.
Yeah, it's such like a complicated space, especially when you have maybe 2 tokens, 3 tokens. It always gets like more intersected and more challenging to kind of evaluate everything.
Exactly,
like,
yeah.
The main question is like, do we really need the token in the game? Like, can we have Web3 games without a token or something?
Yeah, so I think, yeah, it's a hard one, right? Because I guess like the point of the token is like, again, just like fundamentally, right? It just aligns the principles of everybody in the ecosystem, right? Because if everybody owns the part of the token, then that means that like, well, you'll have the incentive for it to do well, both like developers and users alike, right? Rather than, monetization going in like a one-way direction, right? And so like by aligning incentives, like, that's what people will say is like the promise of Web3. Having said that, do you need a token to play a game? Not really, I guess. Like, it could just be like, I don't know, a currency in the game or something like that. But like, obviously there are some games which don't have tokens too, and probably will add one later. But I think tokens they probably hold a very compelling view and operate a very compelling use case when it comes to governance, maybe more so than actual gameplay, right? So like, to what degree people, if decentralization is what we want, like how are we gonna mark that? Right? Like how are we gonna measure that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I understand to see like governance token to take decision and possibly get some sort of revenue coming from the company to the token itself. Although this is kind of regulation, security, and what's on. Yeah. So it's kind of hard. Still very early for that. But yeah, in governance is always like kind of hard because in a sense do you really want everyone to take decision for your project? Maybe the game studio has a sort of long-term project and say, we are doing this. It's going to suck for the next year. Sorry, guys. But in 3 years, 5 years, we're going to have a great project. Instead, if maybe you have a bunch of people voting and sharing their opinion, maybe you don't go anywhere. What's your take on that?
I think this comes back to my take on the value of decentralization overall. I think that like we kind of maybe overstate like how valuable decentralization is, and I think how hard it is to get it right. I think that right now, like looking at DAOs, there have been so many DAOs which have set really terrible precedents. Like, everything from like Solend to like YGG Merit Circle, Tribari, like Juno, all these like cases basically like setting absolutely awful precedents where people can just decide that like one day your property rights don't matter, but ownership is really important. And then it's like, we can just vote to like take over like control of like a whale's account because they like don't respond or something. And then it's like, but and then it's like, oh, we can also like redo a vote because we got an outcome that like a few people didn't like. So they make another proposal. Right. And it's like, to me, like, maybe I'm just not sold on like, I'm sold on the idea of like decentralization, like within ecosystems, allowing people to be on the same page. But I think in practice, like I've not seen like that many cases within games, at least, where it's like been fully like, operational and perfect. Having said that, it doesn't have to be, right? We're still very early and there's still a lot of time for people to iterate. A lot of like DAO tools. When I say a lot of DAO tools, there are a lot of DAO tools, right? But like some of them, like Colony, whatever, the uses like decaying functions make sense, right? Like I think that overall decentralization, like definitely, it's kind of like democracy, right? Like democracy slows down decision making because everyone's got to talk. But like at the same time, it's probably a bit better than like a dictatorship, right?
Yeah, for sure. For in kind of, let's say, a real life scenario, 100% agree. I actually wrote a Substack post probably last week about DAOs and if they make sense or not. I actually had out of 4 example, you got 3. So we have, I put down the Solend, the Rari, the Merry Circle. It's hard to take a decision when you have a bunch of people pulling to their own direction and you don't actually know like what's like who you are and who, let's say, why should we listen to you? You know, like what's your value? Why you're adding value to this community, or you're just talking, just for talking?
Yeah. It's a big shame because I feel like and one thing I like about Web3 as a space in general is that I think relative to like Web2 and like traditional finance in general, we very much prioritize this idea of like cooperation and like collective progression and advancement as opposed to like just like utterly fierce competition. I think good actors generally behave this way. So then when you see like crypto being used as a governance tool to just like enable people to be like short-sighted and just myopic in general, I think that it's a bit of a shame, right? Because I think it just discourages like the broader society to get engaged, and I think definitely for institutions as well, right? So like if like we can invest in something and then we make like 30x, and then we can't realize that because we don't add value or whatever, then like I feel like any institution who looks at this is going to be like, all right, well, am I going to take this to court? Am I really going to bother with this space or whatever? Like, it's just like, there are a lot of reasons to not get involved, right? Which is a big shame from institutional side. Because in a world where like this wasn't the case and we had these problems figured out sooner, like crypto would just be a much less volatile asset class, right? The beta on it would be much lower because people wouldn't think of it as such like a long shot, which will really help everyone's bank accounts, to be honest.
Yeah, at the moment is still a very small industry, and I mean, from a certain sense, it's very correlated to the traditional and global market, but from time to time it has this kind of riding solo kind of move. Do you think it's like, we talked before that gaming has always been sort of not correlated to the economy, even during like a recession, gaming has always performed pretty well. Do you think a mix of gaming and crypto can kind of have its own ecosystem in a sense? Is like it will not be much correlated within both crypto and recession economy in general, or not really?
I think it would definitely always be correlated with crypto, just because people like will just be like, because I think like everything based on blockchain, it's just going to belong in the same like asset class of like how people consider like their own wealth, right? So I think to some degree, yes. With the overall market, I also do think that like gaming as a segment is more resilient, but it's not impenetrable, right? Like I mentioned, right? Like Roblox, getting killed, people spending less in the game, like console makers like Microsoft, Xbox, Nintendo, they're like getting killed for supply chain issues. Chip makers, same story. AMD. I think that there will always be like meaningful correlations with the rest of the economy and crypto as a whole. What I do think though is maybe I'm more interested in how it goes forward in blending with entertainment as a whole. All right. So when I say that, I mean like how will players like Netflix and Disney, etc., those who create like big interactive entertainment media platforms, how will they think about gaming going forward, right? Like Netflix are like absolutely like plumbing so many resources into gaming, right? Like doing so much M&A, hiring a lot of like smart gaming veterans. I think that's something that like generally continue. We have like Miles as well, which I'm super excited about going forward. So I definitely think that like, yeah, there will always be like a strong degree of correlation, just because like people's money is something that's still like consumer spending is like discretionary consumer spending is always going to get crunched during these times. But the more interesting trend from my perspective is how like if it's within wider entertainment, because I also think that's how it's going to like onboard the next set of users as well. That's
true. Yeah, it seems a very broad topic, especially when we say where the next consumers, where the next kind of customer come from, especially in Web3, I was having a conversation the other day, and probably like when you are in this space, you always hear the same opinion. So everyone thinks that the next killer application is gaming. And, sometimes when there is this sort of one side trade, I'm always a bit skeptical. But someone pointed out that maybe it's because we are just we're just talking between each other, and we don't have actually a reference point from outside the crypto world, that they're not really looking at it. So
Definitely.
So do you think like gaming is the next kind of big things for crypto?
I think like I definitely agree that like we definitely like for a community like for like given Web3 is supposed to be so inclusive, we are definitely like just talking amongst the same people, like who can become increasingly aligned in each other's views to an extent which maybe provides like this kind of like lack of diversity of thought. I definitely think that comes into play. I do still think that gaming is the most promising segment in Web3 in general. So like, and I think that overall, like I'm still really excited about gaming. I do think that like, we're seeing valuations growing. Gaming's using like much better like business models. We'll have a couple of more like AAA games on the blockchain as well, like attracting different types of users. I think that like gaming is still something I'm super excited about. Gaming is never going away, right? Like
100%. Yeah, no, the amount of time that I spend and a lot of people that I know spend in games. So for sure, it's always growing. And especially because it depends on the generation as well. Like probably like my generation, we are in the middle. Like I didn't have a computer until, I don't know, I was like 15, 12, 15. Mm-hmm. So I didn't really born with the computer, but like people that are coming out now, they never experience like not having an iPad in front of them. So I think is kind of a different demographic that is coming up, and they've always lived with technology. So games seems to be a sort of very easy, like understandable industry for them. And it could be much easier than understanding DeFi, stuff like that.
100%. I think that there are a lot of like underpenetrated segments in gaming, like obviously particularly like super young people, to some degree, women, elderly, one side, the super young being much more digitally savvy, digitally native, who very much kind of onboard into gaming. Then, we're seeing a lot of like more women and elderly identifying themselves as gamers. I think like this is a stat I said that like 60% of like the next 400 million new gamers by end of 2023 are expected to be women. All right. And so like that really enables like, that demographic shift enables us to think about how like a new suite of games, which, like different customer segments can find interesting and engaging. So yeah, I 100% agree. Like gaming is something that like everyone can take part in.
Yeah. Is there any specific project that you are looking at that maybe is doing something new, something different that caught your eye?
There are quite a few. I think like one I think like a lot of people are looking at is Illuvium, right? Like I think that like the content trailers that they posted online look very, very sick. And I'm sure everyone's going to be very excited for like the open world to be launched. Another is, like I mentioned, Etalas. They've got like some very, very, very solid IP going on into that boxing and rugby games. I think Games for a Living, the guys who were creating Elemental Raiders based in Spain, I actually tried out the beta. It was very cool. I really enjoyed it. It gave me like kind of like cameo Final Fantasy vibes together. It was a cool like time-based play game. Well, they're also creating like very cool infrastructure as well, like their own engine where they plan to essentially have like a switch to turn the blockchain elements in the game on and off to make it extremely easy for anyone to play, whether like you're Web3 native or not. So, and I think that kind of infra is something that's going to be used across the sphere. So I think for sure, yeah, there are a lot of like different games that are coming out that I think will be very cool going forward.
Fantastic. Well, I just wanted to maybe wrap it up a bit. I don't know if there is any suggestion, any thoughts you want to just leave our listeners to, something that maybe you learn along the years here in crypto or just in general in your life.
Oh, general in life, like relevant to gaming or just life in general?
Just like life advice.
Life advice. Life advice is, I saw one tweet that really resonated with me. I forgot who tweeted it, but basically it said, do not compare yourself to other people. That's the easiest way to get distracted. And I think that I thought was very useful.
That's definitely amazing. Amazing. Thank you very much, Serge. Thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you soon in the next episode. Bye-bye.
It's been a pleasure.